to the entertainment Talking Sports.
What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. And in this video, I'm going to jump into an article that was written by NJ.com that was pointed out to me by several of my subscribers. I was at work when it came out. Otherwise, I would have had my opinion out on it sooner than now. But there were a lot of very interesting quotes in this article coming out of the mouth of John Mara, basically telling people that he feels like he is still the owner that he was back in the day when they were winning Super Bowls. Even though that some people may question that, obviously he made a lot of questionable decisions over the last 6 or 7 years. The biggest mistake, in my opinion, and most people's opinion, that he is largely responsible for was deciding to move on from Tom Coughlin but not cleaning house. He decided to keep on Jerry Reese. And as bad as Jerry Reese was as a GM after, that Super Bowl, he had poor draft after poor draft after poor draft. Obviously he had some success early on. I give him credit for Victor Cruz. I give him credit for Hakeem Nicks. He definitely found some good pieces. Couldn't draft late in drafts, and he put himself in that situation. But once you kept on Jerry Reese and you hired a new coach, Jerry Reese knew it was put up or shut up time. He knew, and if he didn't get it done, he was going to be replaced, which is why Jerry Reese went out there the next offseason and spent like a lunatic, because he knew if the team didn't significantly improve off their 5 or 6 win season from the year before, he was going to be without a job. And it worked for 1 year. They won 11 games, and then the team went to hell because Jerry Reese was no longer thinking about the team's long-term success. He was thinking about keeping his job, and that is why when the Giants decided to move on from Pat Shurmur, as much as I like Dave Gettleman, there's a lot of things he does that I like, I said to myself, if you're not going to give Dave Gettleman the timeline of the new head coach, there's no point in keeping him. And in this article, even though it did not directly come out of the mouth of Mara, it may have been hinted. And, like I said, this may be a little nonsense from NJ.com. If you really read the article, this seemed as if there was their opinion. I will pull up the quote. I will talk about exactly what John Mara had to say. It may have been hinted, and I hope John Mara does not share the same idea of the writer of this article, because if he does, this is dangerous stuff. Because if Dave Gettleman feels that John Mara feels that way, Dave Gettleman is going to go out there this year and do the same thing that Jerry Reese did. He's going to go out there and sign as many guys as he can to try to fix this team right now and not worry about the future, because he needs to keep his job and he'll figure it out the next year. And that's not the way that you build a team. You go over the best teams. I did a video on this. You go over the best teams in football, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the New England Patriots, all these teams, they all have patience. They don't go on spending sprees in one offseason, which is what Jerry Reese did. But the reason Jerry Reese did it was because he was retained, and he knew they had just fired a head coach, and he knew if he didn't get the team into gear, he was going to be the next guy that they went after. Like I've said several times, Eli Manning was the guy. Once Eli Manning went down, they went to Pat Shurmur. Now that Pat Shurmur went down and they brought in a new head coach, who do you think they're going to go after next? They're going to go after Dave Gettleman, which is why if you're not going to give Dave Gettleman the same timeline of Joe Judge, if you're going to give Joe Judge some slack and say we got to be patient, a new coaching staff, things like this, you got to do the same thing with your general manager. Even if you guys don't like Dave Gettleman, that is the right way to approach this now that Dave Gettleman is back. And I hope the things that were said in this article are not true, because that is very dangerous if that is the case. Because if you then fire Dave Gettleman after 1 year, first off, he's going to make decisions, if he knows that's the case, that are going to try to benefit the team in the immediate future and not for long-term success, which is what the best teams do. They set it up for long-term success. They have a plan for 5 years, not just for 1. And if you fire him after this year, say the team goes out there, they win 5 games, and obviously you're going to keep Joe Judge because you're not going to fire 3 coaches in 4 years. But, let's say that you replace Dave Gettleman. You're then, which guy with any credentials would want to come into this job? After, you just went through, you're forcing on a head coach who has no experience. He's got 1 year of experience and he's got 5 or 6 wins to his name. And you've been a very unstable organization. You're coming in with all the pressure. So that is why when they didn't clean house and they didn't start from scratch, to me, that signaled that Dave Gettleman gets at least 2, if not 3 years. He should be on the same timeline as Joe Judge, in my opinion. I think that's the way it should work. Whether you like Gettleman or not, you have to give him a chance now to carry it out. That's just being a horrible organization if you don't. And like I've said several times, this is not going to be fixed in one day. As much as somebody may hate Dave Gettleman, you got to take this into account. And it's the same way with a president of the United States. Let's just take that for example. And I don't get political on this channel, but let's, if somebody takes over the country or a team when it's at a very low point, you can't expect them to fix it in the matter of a year or two. It just doesn't happen. It's like in poker when you get dealt deuce 7 offsuit, which is basically what Dave Gettleman was dealt. He had horrible cap space. He had aging veterans. He had no cap space. He had very little young talent. He had a quarterback who was 38 years old. He got dealt a very bad situation. You couldn't expect him to turn deuce 7 offsuit in the pocket aces in 2 years. It doesn't work that way. And that's why we have to display patience, in my opinion. Now, I would not have been upset if they moved on from Dave Gettleman once they decided to fire Shermer and start from scratch. But once you kept Gettleman and you brought on Joe Judge, you have to let this play out. You can't just cut bait like it said in this article. But let's jump into some of the quotes and then I'll further talk about it. And there is John Mara, and we'll start with the first quote. This was John Mara talking to NJ.com about loyalty. Of course, the Mara family has been known to be very loyal, sometimes to a fault. Even his father back in the day was extremely loyal, and it was a big reason why the team was rented to the ground in the 70s. But here's the quote. Loyalty is a wonderful trait, but you have to know when to be loyal and when to do what's best for the organization, John Mara said. I don't ever want to go back to those days. They were painful decades. But, and you could certainly argue, and I don't disagree with that, by the way. I do think that you need to be loyal. I think you need to be patient. But when you see it's not working, sometimes you have to make a move. I don't disagree with that. But you could argue that John Mara did not learn from his father's mistakes. As much as I love Eli Manning, and I don't blame him for a lot of the team's problems, he never fit the timeline of the team after 2016, 2017. You had an aging quarterback with a team that was 4 or 5 years away, and they tried to fix it because Mara was too loyal. So he seems a bit hypocritical in that statement, in my opinion. But he is a very loyal guy for the most part. I think he had to move on from Shermer. I think he was forced to by the fans, by the media, and Shermer was just not a very good head coach. But for the most part, during his tenure, he has been very patient. He was very patient with Jerry Reese. He was very patient with Tom Coughlin. There were a number of times where the fan base was calling for Tom Coughlin's head, and he stuck by him. And, they ended up winning 2 Super Bowls because of it. So, for the most part, he has been very loyal. But sometimes, like he said, you can be loyal to a fault. Next thing he talked about. I don't fear that I've lost the touch. When asked about, obviously because he had won 2 Super Bowls in 08 and 12, they asked him, do you feel like you're out of touch? And then they kind of hinted at because you're old, Gettleman's old, maybe you need younger blood, you need younger minds in here, like a guy like a Joe Judge, things like that. He told NJ Advanced Media, but I certainly understand our fans' lack of trust in what we're doing right now. And the only way to win that back is to start winning games. I get that. The record is what it is, and I can't defend that. I don't feel any differently about myself and my judgment now that I did in February of 2012. Certainly, the record doesn't bear that out. But I have just as much confidence in myself now as I did in 2012. And that's all well and good, and hopefully you can get this team back on the right track. But this was the most alarming thing that was said in this article. And like I said, this was just based off the writer's assumption. This was not a quote from Mara. I want to reiterate that. A lot of people on Twitter were saying that Mara said this, or this came out of the Mara's mouth. This came out of the writer's mouth. But the writer did interview Mara. So this is what he gathered from things that Mara said. But this is opinion-based. Mara will not be patient with Gettleman in 2020. Mara expects results, or Gettleman is finished. But Mara understands he must give Joe Judge time to develop and help him more than he helped McAdoo. Mara too rarely checked in on his rookie head coach in 2016, never stopped by his office to chat. McAdoo could have used the guidance, something Mara realized too late. McAdoo declined to comment for this story. And if that quote is true, that's not a good thing to be out. First off, Mara might feel that way, might think that way. That's not a good thing for Dave Gettleman to know. That is dangerous. And like I said, Mara didn't say that. He was not quoted as saying that. That is just what the writer gathered from talking to Dave Gettleman. But if that's true, and if not from talking to John Mara, rather, about Dave Gettleman. But if that is true, and if that is truly the way that John Mara feels, that's not good. That's not good for this New York Giants football team because he may do the same thing that Jerry Reese did. And what Jerry Reese did was ruin this team because we were still getting out of cap space hell up until last year because of some of the things that Jerry Reese did. He looked for short-term solutions and he wasn't thinking long-term. But if Dave Gettleman goes into this year knowing that his job's on the line, and he's going to feel that way, he's going to feel pressure from the fan base, he may very well go out there and spend more than he should and try to fix this team in 1 year, which is not the right way to go about doing this. They need to take a 2 or 3 year approach. like the 49ers did. The 49ers now have some cap space. They built it incrementally. I'm not against signing one big free agent this year and building with 1 and 2 year contracts. I've said I'd go after a Jack Conklin if he was available. I would even sign Yannick if you felt like he was the guy, but I wouldn't want to spend on 2 or 3 5-year deals. That's not the way to do it. Rome was not built in a day. They need to save cap space to retain some of their players that they've drafted on long-term extensions. And you just can't build a team through completely or, for the most part, through free agency. And Mara has come out and said that he does not intend to go hog wild in free agency. He was quoted of saying those exact things. And if that's the case, if you're not going to go hog wild in free agency, how could you expect Dave Gettleman to turn this team around this year? Now, should we expect some improvement? Sure. And could they make the playoffs? Sure. But you can't go into the season with playoff or busts, and Dave Gettleman's out of here. This team is bad. They were a bad football team. They were a bad offensive line. They were a bad defense. It's going to take more than 1 year to get this team back on the right track, and they need to approach it that way and not try to fix it in 1 year. But when you go out there and you write articles like this and say that Dave Gettleman, it's put up or shut up time, that's what will get us back in the mess that we were in a couple of years ago. We can't have a general manager building for 1 year. We need a general manager that's building for 5. That's the way you win in the NFL long term. And hopefully Mara doesn't feel the way that the writer of this article on NJ.com displayed. That's all I could say, because that would be horrible news for the New York Giants, in my opinion. As always, guys, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.